Please welcome Steve. We've got two in this one, which the hard ones come over two. So.
Okay, some of you will know me from Warbirds. I've been a long time member, 33 years I think I joined Warbirds. And I'd learned to fly at the Waitemata Aero Club as a young guy, and I was actually sent solo by the late great Kelvin Starr, who was known to a lot of you. I could have taken two paths in life. One would have been flying for a career, but I took the alternative, which was to become a used car dealer. It poles apart, but so be it. But the car business allowed me to afford to indulge my passion in aviation from an early age, and I learned to fly, got a commercial licence, got involved in aerobatics, pit specials, then I joined Warbirds and bought a share in a Harvard. And like many great schemes in life, the plan to rebuild a Second World War fighter and fly it was hatched over a few quiet beers one night in the Warbirds bar. And the project had already started. This is about 1985. Two guys, namely Robbie Booth, who's still around, John Greenstreet, who isn't, and two ex-Kiwi airline pilots that were living in, I think it was Dubai, Gulf Air. Was that Dubai? Bahrain. So these four guys had found that a couple of Yanks had bought the whole ex-Iraq Air Force supply of Hawk Sea Furies and shipped them to the States, and they were up for sale. So these four guys put the money together, and it wasn't a lot. If I remember, it's a long time ago, but I think it cost about 50,000 US Kiwi dollars at the time to buy an intact Sea Fury, although broken down, and a couple of engines. And these airframes were based in Illinois, a place called Rockford. And due to a large number of ex-Air Force guys being members of Warbirds, we managed to pull some strings, and the 40 Squadron was instrumental in flying this Sea Fury back to New Zealand. They had a Herc in the States doing some sort of work, and so this aeroplane, this Sea Fury, was loaded into the Herc, made the news in Rockford, Illinois, flying back here. We made a small donation. It might have been to a bar at Benua, I can't remember. It didn't cost us much anyway. And so that was about end of 85, early 86, and then the rebuild started in earnest, and it quickly became a huge drain financially on the members, and we lost the two airline pilots. I can't even remember why now, but they couldn't afford to continue participation in the project. So it was down to the three of us: myself, the used car dealer, Robbie Booth, who had an engineering business, and John Greenstreet, who had a very successful business. He owned a company back in those days called Carborundum. You might remember Carborundum paper, sandpaper, he owned that. And he had just sold it for millions prior to the 87 share market crash. So we were all I was the youngest of the group. I think I was 32 or something at the time. John was 42 and Rob was a similar age. But we had the financial ability to carry this project through to the end. And we didn't want it to drag on for years, so we just threw lots of money at it, and we had the aeroplane up and running relatively quickly with a project like that. And I think we first flew it. It was test flown in 1987, so it took us about 18 months to rebuild it. It was all done here at Ardmore Gulf Aeronautics. Bruce Coulter had experience with Sea Furies in the UK, and there were a couple of other guys. Warren Denham, who does the Mosquitoes now, he was a young apprentice engineer and worked for them. And I was talking to him on Monday just to clear a couple of technical facts up. And he said, you know, I got the job at Gulf Aeronautics. He said, it was huge money. He said, I got offered $8 an hour to work on this aeroplane. And it's sort of, you've got to, things are relative to the value of the dollar. I mean, someone asked me before, what did we spend rebuilding the aeroplane? And I seem to remember we spent about between $500,000 and $600,000. And back then, that was a hell of a lot of money. Well, to do that project now, you wouldn't get change out of millions. So I don't know what labour rates are for engineers, $75 an hour perhaps. So anyway, we got this thing finished, and the three of us went to the States and flew a two-seat Sea Fury with the late Frank Sanders, who was Mr. Sea Fury, and his son still rebuilds Sea Furies in America. And they raced them at Reno, and they were the world authorities. So we both did, the three of us did about 3 hours flying each. Did everything, aerobatics, spun the thing, circuits, had a great time. And came back here and the aeroplane was ready to go, and we employed Guido Zaccoli, who was an Italian who had a few Sea Furies as well. And he was based in Darwin, and he'd been an aerobatic pilot, represented Australia in the world aerobatic scene back in the 70s, flying pit special, very accomplished pilot, and made a fortune as an engineer in Darwin after Cyclone Tracy. He built bridges and things, and it had been decimated by Cyclone Tracy, and that's how Guido made his money. Well, we got Guido over and his engineer, and Guido test flew the Fury out here one Saturday, and everything went reasonably well. It had one little minor problem which we rectified, and this was March '88, I think. Yeah. So the weekend went fine. He did about 4 or 5 flights in it, and a couple of minor technical hitches which were rectified. But the first Wanaka air show was looming that year, Easter, it was early April, I think. And Rob Booth was chaffing at the bit to get the aeroplane down to Wanaka. And we were slightly hesitant because it hadn't really been fully test flown in the respect that we weren't that current. I mean, I flew it once, did a whole lot of circuits out here. John Greenstreet hadn't flown it. Rob flew it a couple of times, and we're about to launch off to Wanaka with like a brand new aeroplane, really, with not a lot of experience. Well, hindsight is always 20/20, and we probably shouldn't have gone, but we did. And Rob flew the aeroplane to Wanaka. I flew Rob's Harvard, and Rob had a problem at Nelson. A hydraulic line burst. And he went into Nelson, the local engineer fixed this bit of tubing, put a new bit on, got to Wanaka, flew it over the weekend, and had the same problem occur with the aeroplane. And at the end of the air show, he said to me, I don't really want to fly it home, do you want to fly it? I said, you've flown it for the last week, I haven't. I mean, you've got to bear in mind, I had a commercial licence with about 500 hours. Rob had a private pilot's licence with maybe 150 hours. So we're pretty green, and we've got this bloody 2,500 horsepower brute at our hands. So anyway, I just brought Rob's Harvard back with his 10-year-old son in the back, and he flew the Fury back. Well, I think it was over Woodburn. He had this hydraulic problem, which, in simple terms, the hydraulic pump self-destructed whilst in flight, and consequently, to get the undercarriage down, the flaps down, and to be able to use the brakes, which we'd converted to hydraulics from the old Pommy pneumatic system, necessitated using a backup system, which was used it once, that was it, was all gone. So you had to get it right. So Rob elected to carry on to the North Island because he didn't want to get stranded in Woodburn, so he went into Paraparaumu. He managed to get the undercarriage down, he got the flaps down, landed, but alas, he had no brakes. So here's this large piece of metal careering down the runway, and when the wind took over, it turned the aeroplane off the runway, and it went down a disused runway and slammed into a hangar. It did a fair bit of damage to the hangar and the aeroplane. Now, I was tagging along with the rest of the Harvards, but we were in Nelson. I gathered something had gone on in Paraparaumu, but we weren't sure. And it wasn't until we got back to Ardmore here that we realised that the Fury had an incident. So, okay, the engineers put their thinking caps on and try to decipher the problem and think they have solved the problem. So they go down to Paraparaumu over the next couple of months. We put a new propeller blade on it, had 5 blades. One was bent badly when it hit the hangar, so we put a new one of those. The leading edge was damaged, so that needed of one wing, so there's a bit of panel beating involved there. It needed a new spinner. They put it all back together. We got a new hydraulic pump from Australia, and I got the short straw to bring it home because I was the most experienced pilot. So we all went down, Warren Dean and myself, Mike Smith, who did the engine, and Warren's father, Colin. And we went down to Paraparaumu, we ran the thing about 6 times, and I taxied it around, and it was all good. And this was June 1988, middle of winter, and it's early afternoon, so it's going to get dark at about, I don't know, 4:30, 5 o'clock. So, aeroplane's all good to go, and Warren and his entourage set off on the little Grumman trainer at 100 knots or whatever it was, and everyone at Paraparaumu wanted to beat up, so I got on the Sea Fury, fired it up, off I went south, turned around, came back, gave them the beat up, and headed for Auckland. And I'm flying along fat, dumb and happy at about a beam Ohakea on the coast. I wasn't high, VFR, was, whatever height it was, 3,000-4,000 feet. And I looked down, in the left-hand side of the cockpit there was a hydraulic gauge. I looked at it and it was full of red fluid, and the needle went and broke off. We haven't fixed the hydraulics, have we? So, I had a pretty good understanding of the systems in the aeroplane because the engineering side of things really interested me. So I thought, shit, if that glass blows out of the gauge and fills the cockpit with vaporised hydraulic fluid, I'm history. So I had a big rag in the flying suit, so I pulled that out and held it over the gauge, thinking if it does go, I might lose a couple of fingers or something, but I'll get away with it. And I'd agreed with Wal that we'd have a discrete frequency to chat on as we went up the North Island. So I get on this discrete frequency, and I did use a couple of four-letter expletives to explain my situation, but unbeknown to me, Ohakea seems to have the ability to listen to every frequency. So the next thing I got a call from Ohakea, have you got a problem? And I said, well, I have actually, yeah. And they said, well, do you want to come in here? And I said, no, I'll keep going, I'll go to Hamilton. Because I'd had another look at the gauge and all the fluid had drained away and there was no pressure in the system, so I thought, well, I'll just carry on to Hamilton and I'll use the emergency system to get the gear and the flaps down and hopefully I've got brakes. And as it transpired, that's exactly what happened. Got to Hamilton, pumped the gear down, pumped the flaps down, did a good landing, the brakes worked, pulled off the runway, up by the terminal, got out, had a look under the aeroplane, and it was just saturated with hydraulic fluid. So these guys are way behind me in their Grumman, and they finally get to Hamilton, and it's late in the day, and it's sun setting. They were pleased that nothing untoward had happened other than blowing the hydraulic system up. And we towed the aeroplane up to aerospace, I think it is, that made the little things that you flew, Cliff. And over 6 days they went through it and they couldn't fix it. They had no idea what had caused the problem. So we got it serviceable in the sense that put some more fluid in it, and I flew it back up here with the gear down. And it took probably 3 or 4 months to actually diagnose the fault. And when it was diagnosed, it was sort of a ray of sunlight really, because it was an incorrect fitting that being put into the hydraulic system, wrong return valve, wrong setting, and it didn't allow the hydraulic pump to go into a sort of a neutral mode when you were up in the air flying along. And the reason the problem had never manifested itself here when I flew it early on and did circuits is because the gear was going up and down, the flaps were going up and down, so the hydraulic system never had an opportunity to cook itself. It was only when you were a long cross-country reliable, half an hour into a flight, that it would overheat and self-destruct. So anyway, the thing was rectified, fixed, and I flew it a few more times. But unfortunately, in 1990, just before an air show we had here, John Greenstreet was killed. We were all on the Roaring Forties formation team, and we had a meteor out here and John was killed. And that put a bit of a financial strain on the syndicate. Rob Booth's business wasn't going too good. I think I was just about to get married, so there was an expectation that I might have to buy a house or something and get rid of this bloody expensive toy. So when John was killed, his estate obviously wanted out of this aeroplane, and we sold it, and Grant Beale bought it, and Grant might be known to a lot of you. And Grant flew it for a bit. He flew it across Tasman twice to Tasmania in the early 90s. He took it down to Wanaka a few times for the early 92 4 air shows. And then he sold it to a guy named Steve Hart, an Australian accountant who ended up in jail about 12, 13 years ago for a massive fraud. He had gone public with his accountancy business, and he was listed on the stock exchange. He had businesses here, but it was all smoke and mirrors, and it all imploded on him. He had an aircraft collection. He flew competition aerobatics. The lot was seized by the federal police in Australia, and they still own the Sea Fury. It's in a hangar in Brisbane, along with a few other heavy metal Warbirds that he's got, his aerobatic aeroplane, and some other stuff. And it's sat there now for well over 10 years, so if they ever release it, it would need an extensive going over, I think, before it ever flew again. But further to that story, 2 years ago I was in Darwin on holiday, and I'd been out in the Kakadu National Park looking at crocodiles and things, and I had a few more days to go actually in Darwin. So I went out to the airport and I managed to track down Guido Zoccoli's engineer, a German guy named Nobby. And Nobby rebuilt the engines on the Sea Furies that Guido had, and he was a real authority on the Hawker Sea Fury. So I tracked him down and went and saw him, and he remembered me. And he'd just sold his entire collection of Sea Fury stuff to a collector in France. So this was October 2 years ago. And he said, "Oh, Steve," I said, "What do you do now, Nobby, for a living?" And he fixes things, he's a good engineer. He said, "I'll come out the back with me." We go to the back of this big engineering shop that he had, and there's this room with a padlocked door, and he opens it, and it's all air conditioned, it was lovely and cold, and there on these pristine tables were 2 Bristol Centaurus engines that he was rebuilding for a couple of collectors in America, one in America, one in France. So, the Sea Fury continued. And if you go to, there's an aviation museum in Darwin at the airport where the Americans gifted the museum a B-52 bomber. So they built this huge hangar over this B-52, and it's a bloody good museum. It's full of really interesting stuff. A lot of Japanese downed aircraft from World War II that they've recovered in the Northern Territory. But the pride of place, as you walk in the door at the front, is a Bristol Centaurus engine that Guido gifted the museum back in the early 80s when he first started rebuilding and flying at Sea Furies. Guido was an interesting character. He had 2 engine failures in his Fury, and dead stick them into the desert without a problem. Just towed them back to his base in Toowoomba and put another engine in it and a few new prop plates. And he had an engine failure in a pit special in Darwin, and he ended up in a swamp full of crocodiles and managed to survive that. And when he came out here to test flight, I always remember on the Saturday that the first flight took place, I said, Guido, you haven't got a parachute. I've got one that I use in my pits. Do you want to borrow it? He said, no. I said, why not? He said, if the engine stops, he said, I ride the bitch to the ground. Fair enough. Fair enough. There are a couple of interesting, when we first started the project, we got a bit of flack because pre-internet, so all correspondence with anyone was via the telephone or writing letters. And I got given the job to decide or to find some colour schemes for it. And I rang Ross McPherson up, who used to own Wings magazine, and because they used to advertise, there used to be a guy that advertised in Wings, and he made transfers for plastic model aeroplanes. And he was, whoever he was an authority on colour schemes for Second World War aircraft. So I rang Ross up one day, and I knew Ross, and I said, mate, that guy that used to advertise in the magazine, any chance of getting a hold of him for me? He said, oh no, well, he's a school teacher at Wanganui Collegiate. I'll give him a ring and he'll get the info for you. Well, a couple of weeks went past and we got a letter from Ross. Sorry, I got a phone call from Ross saying, got the information you want, but I've got this interesting letter I'll send to you. And it was from the school teacher at Wanganui Collegiate, who was an expert modeller, an authority on colour schemes, and he gave us all the information we requested, we were looking for. And the last sentence or paragraph was, yeah, Ross, I believe there are some dreamers in Auckland that think they're going to rebuild one of these things and actually fly it. Well, we did. The other interesting thing in those early days was we also received a letter when the aeroplane arrived here. We received a letter from a guy that I know very well, and a lot of you will, and I won't mention his name, offering his services as a pilot to fly this thing, because we were surely incapable of doing so, because 2 of us only had PPLs, and I had a commercial, but we had no experience with these sorts of aeroplanes. We declined his offer, and he never did get to fly, but we did. So yeah, it was probably second heavy metal aeroplane, because Tim Wallace already bought the Mustang. So it was, yeah, we pioneered the way of what's happening today in some respects. It's a great shame that the aeroplane's not still here, but that's the way it is. And maybe one day it will come up for sale, I don't know. The police may dispose of it. But it would need a fair bit of work on it to get it operational again. So that's the guts of the Sea Fury story. Yeah, you can Google all the relevant facts, and there are a few YouTube clips of it flying here. But I did about 10 hours in it, I think. And it was a beautiful aeroplane to fly. It was actually quite an easy aeroplane to fly. Contrary to what a lot of people would lead you to believe, Second World War fighters aren't that difficult to fly if you've got some basic knowledge and ability. They do command a healthy respect, but the Fury was the pinnacle of piston engine development. So it was docile on the ground, it handled beautifully, it was easy to land, the systems were pretty good, it was a lovely thing to fly. The controls were very harmonious and light. It was a joy to fly, really. And I think in service they got pretty good time out of the Centaurus engine, albeit a very complicated piece of machinery. It did I think it did pretty well. Yeah, that's the Sea Fury.
Awesome.